Hello and welcome to this special Accountancy Age webinar. I say special because we have worked with our sister publication, HRD Connect, and are sponsored by CABA, the charity supporting the well-being of chartered accountants and their families, to bring this webinar together. I'm Tom Lemon, reporter for Accountancy Age and your host for today. We are, of course, today talking about living and working in a changing environment. As we edge closer to nearly a year of living with coronavirus in the UK, so much has changed, and it's fair to expect that work will change when we do eventually come out the other end. So today we're going to discuss how to manage your team and ensure well-being is front of mind as the UK deals with tougher restrictions while preparing for the vaccine rollout, where we may see a sort of shift to hybrid working environment later in the year. So with me to discuss all this, I have three great guests for you. First, we have Isabel Campbell, one of CABA's expert trainers. Isabel is also a finance director at the Financial Times and a chartered accountant who qualified with a Big Four firm. As a finance director for a large media organization, Isabel is passionate about sharing her industry experience to help others achieve a work-life blend, build resilience, and increase inner peace. Next, we have Emma Storer, Group People Manager. She is responsible for people and culture at Haines Watts, and in 2020 led the team that won silver at the Employee Experience Awards for the Leadership Development Program. Emma is MCIPD qualified and has a proven track record in building a values-based culture in a large home care provider, human resources and business transformation. And last but not least, we have Alex Arundel, who is the Chief People Officer at one of the UK's largest business software providers, Advance. Alex joined Advance in February 2016 and is responsible for leading the company's talent management and development initiatives from recruitment through to retention. She has already made a huge impact in introducing innovative people-focused approaches, including attraction strategies which actively avoid unconscious bias. And just lastly from me before we get started, there will be time for questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, just go into the Q&A function that you should see on your screen, and we'll get to them after the main discussion. And we'll try and get to as many as possible. But let's finally get rid of me talking and hear from our three guests. So we're going to spend the first few minutes talking about hybrid working and how that might change and what it would look like. So shall I perhaps start with Isabel? So Isabel, welcome. How do you see work changing once life does eventually become more normal?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, things are certainly going to be different in the future, I'm sure of it. I think when we went into this, we were thinking, in a few months we'll just get back to normal. But now people can see a permanently changed way of working. So for me, that looks like more balance and more flexibility. And what I really hope is that people hold on to the things that they have valued in lockdown. So that's probably less travel, less international travel, probably less commuting time. I think we've proven our ability to be more truly global since we've proved that we can do it. So I would expect people to spend less time, buzzing around all over the place trying to get to places, and perhaps valuing, a bit more space, a bit more time at home maybe. That's certainly what I would hope for anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, do you see the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree with there being more flexibility and less travel. I think some additional things, we'll definitely see a much more continued focus on well-being, particularly with mental health conditions increasing because of the pandemic. And I think also we'll see with work that there'll be a better integration of technology, I think, to support how we work better and smarter, and therefore probably more focused on some of the softer skills such as empathy and listening. So I think we'll see a slight shift in the skills focus because of that.
Interesting. Okay. And Alex, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I have to agree both with Isabel and Emma on all the points they've made. I think tech is absolutely the thing that we've learned has been a great enabler for the flexibility. And we've all had kind of moments where it's not worked, and then to have consistency when that tech is working, enables the flexibility and enables now a whole new way of thinking about the future. So I can see that I think office space should look different in the future. I think we will have more requirement to have those kind of touchdown time to collaborate in a different way and to have more meaningful collaborations and really think about when we're going into the office, why are we going in now? What is it we want to achieve? I think different demographics have had different challenges through the last 12 months, and we know that there's a big strain of kind of the younger part of the workforce who are really desperate for some of those normal touch points. Also, as they're perhaps learning new jobs and started working in new companies, they want to be able to spend time physically with people. So I think there's going to be a real balance to going forward, but I think it's a really positive change that has been definitely forced upon us all. But I think what's been great is to see, everybody really seek to embrace the opportunities. And the thing that I think we've probably all read about is things like they call them the pandemic puppies. People who've gone out there and changed their lives now through acquiring new pets into their family situation. Well, that does require then management. You can't just go straight back into the office and think, what do I do with that new life and family situation that we've now been living through the last 12 months? So I think it's really interesting. I think it's really positive and definitely is the road to greater flexibility and really greater engagement from our workforces.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen a lot of puppies invading my Instagram feed for sure. You mentioned that sort of, looking at what's the purpose of going into the office, which before is just, that wasn't a question, was it? That's what you did. And do you think, maybe Emma, if we start with you, do you think there is an appetite to get back into the office once it's safe to do so?
Yeah, I think there definitely is, certainly for some. I think we're going to obviously find that some people will have welcomed the ability to work from home. And I think without some of the additional presence of children and pets interfering, I think they probably would welcome that better. But I think we can certainly see there are people that definitely have an appetite to be back in the office. Whether that's because they don't have suitable workspaces at home to be able to work effectively, or it might be other reasons, such as the social interaction. We're social creatures, and, that interaction face-to-face, by the coffee machine or sat in a meeting room together, I think for some, you can't actually, you can't replace some of the benefits you get. So whilst there are some organisations that you've seen that are closing premises and are definitely going to be working in a much more virtual world, I definitely have experienced seeing some wanting to have, a hybrid of both, and for people to have the opportunity to be back in, even if it is to be able to collaborate for projects, meeting time, and other tasks can perhaps be done at home.
Yeah, there's a, particularly on the, like was said earlier, particularly for younger professionals, it seems like maybe in the finance area and the accountancy area that I've been hearing is that, it's okay online, but you do some tasks. It's nice to have someone over your shoulder just going, look, this is how you do it. So Isabel, maybe if I come to you, you said that hybrid sort of working environment. What does that look like to you? What does a hybrid work environment look like?
Yeah, for me, it's a more fluid approach to my working day. And I think, just going back to the question that you just asked about, do people want to go back to the office? I think even the people that, early on thought, brilliant, this is great, I never want to have to get on another train again, I don't want to have to sit in an office full of people. I think we've really seen a change. And even though the most kind of, the keenest work from homers, I think it's that sort of, that physical contact, isn't it? As Emma's saying. I think for me, it's like looking at the whole sort of organic, your whole life, really. It's not just about work. It's not just about the office. It's about, for me, it's about childcare. It's about exercise. It's about my professional day. It's about my meetings. And I think before the pandemic, it all had a very rigid structure to it. which, I used to get the same train in the morning. My office day was more or less the same, although the content of it was very different. I used to go to the same gym classes, all of that stuff. My children were in school at a particular time. And I actually thought I liked that rigid structure. But the learning that I've had from this is that the ability to have that flexibility in your whole day is, for me, it's been so important to my well-being. And, there's such a focus on that now that, actually that ability to have that more fluid approach to the working day, I think is really valuable. So like I said before, I'd really love to see people thinking, okay, what is it about this that I enjoy? What is it I value? What's good for me? And can I take that forward into this hybrid working environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Is that something you're seeing, Alex?
Absolutely. And, really just to reiterate some of the points here, it's about, we have a greater understanding, I think, of our needs and what makes us happy now that we've all experienced the last 12 months. And I think it's also allowed a lot of people to kind of, test out the trust of productivity from home. So that's always been, in my experience, a big kind of blocker sometimes for people trusting people to work in that more flexible way. We've had to. We've all proven it. We've all delivered. And so that has been, I think, a real game changer in how we consider our team dynamics and what allows us to bring the best of ourselves to work every day. It's not necessarily bringing ourselves to the office. And I come back to the point of, having a reason to go in. Let's make all these decision points meaningful. Let's consider them rather than just getting back onto that normal kind of hamster wheel of doing what we did before. I think we've all had to really consider, far greater flexibility, just managing childcare, managing homeschooling, which is something that I think, most of us on this call are, experiencing the challenge of that at the moment. And it's really hard. But it's made us think about how we do things in a different way, and also how we consider our teams, and our colleagues. I think it's made us all healthier and, and more considered colleagues, quite honestly. And I really, I think that's our challenge, to ensure that we continue to make sure that they live and breathe with us going forward, and that we don't forget and just go back to kind of old ways. I think this is the opportunity to be creative and to retain that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings me on quite nicely to the next topic of sort of looking at mental health of employees. I think it's no surprise a lot of people have struggled with their mental health since the very first lockdown. I was going to ask, Alex, let's stay with you. Do you think that it's something employers will have to be sort of even more aware of and more considerate of from now on?
Absolutely. I mean, it was always something with which we have had to be considerate of, but I think we've moved away from just having what are very valuable benefits in terms of things like employee assistance programs, to really ensuring that we take the responsibility to help managers learn and develop skills to manage these areas as well. So our managers have had to upskill really fast, and what has been, sometimes perhaps a slightly more alien behaviour, to share more, to be more transparent. We've all kind of met each other's family and kids and pets on all the calls that we're having. So I think it's broken down barriers and probably concerns that people had, that they needed to show a work self versus just their self. And I think that's been valuable, and we need to once again kind of hold on to that and build forward. So for me, bringing that, vulnerability and transparency. So our CEO coming onto calls with camera, sharing how he's feeling throughout the last 12 months journey, and really personal stories, I think has gone a huge way in our organisation to building trust, confidence, and vulnerability. And I think that's where managers and leaders have really excelled, when they have, got to grips with that and realised it's okay to kind of let go. And we've all probably had a bit of a cry. Quite frankly, I've definitely had a bit of a cry with my own team. We'd probably all be lying if we said we hadn't. And I think that's really healthy. And, even now I see emails all the time about all the different initiatives that, not only our company, but so many companies are driving. It seems like, Time to Talk Day is next week. That would be something with which we would, in past years, definitely market. But now actually we're marketing it in a way internally to really drive a much higher level of expected engagement than previously, because we've been doing a lot of these initiatives, within our own companies. So, for things like we're considering a kind of lunch buddy system for that Time to Talk Day where, be randomly paired with somebody to talk. And I think we all feel in a much more comfortable place to do that than we certainly were 12 months ago. So I think it's been an incredible, positive journey for us being open and transparent. Of course, different demographics of our colleagues have had different impacts, and I think that once again has been a really wonderful kind of level. As you say, we've all got different and unique challenges here. Let's not judge. Let's listen. Let's help. But the biggest thing is about the listening. I mean, I really think that, certainly in my experience, has been the most valuable aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. And Isabel, as a finance director at the Financial Times, is that something, I assume you're managing people, and is that something you're becoming more aware of now than ever before?
Yeah. I love what Alex said just there about, you mentioned vulnerability, and you also talked about, bringing your whole self to work. And I've always passionately believed that, we need to show more vulnerability as leaders. I mean, obviously there's a balance to be had, and you want to instill confidence in people, so you have to kind of temper that vulnerability in certain situations. But that's one thing I have found to be really positive about this, is we are all showing our own vulnerabilities, whether it's just getting an insight into the sort of, the sort of place that someone lives in. I know lots of people are working from their kitchen tables with flatmates, or seeing, I've had my children running naked, I mean, there's all sorts. And just sort of knowing that you're a human being. I truly believe that, when there's this big gap between our authentic self and who we choose to bring to work, I do think that can create, sort of mental difficulty and really impacts our well-being. Whereas now I think we've had this opportunity to show those vulnerabilities, as Alex said, and to bring our whole selves to work. And I think the thing to remember is, that for me as a person and as a leader within the FT, but also as a well-being professional, that comes quite naturally to me. But of course it does not come naturally to everybody. And, exactly as we've already said, managers have had to upskill really quickly. And it's not, I think management in itself, never mind in a global pandemic, is a real challenge. And I think no matter what training courses you go on, it's something that you can really only learn through experience. Certainly myself, I know if I look back over the sort of 12 or so years I've been managing, I've definitely made mistakes, and that's how I've learned. And I think now, we really need to support managers of people, to help with these conversations. I love the idea of the lunch buddy thing as well. Actually, we have we use a communication tool called Slack, which I'm sure some of you will be familiar with, and we use an algorithm on that to set people up for coffees. And I think it's it's great. People are up for that kind of thing now. I think it's brilliant.
You need that sort of break in the day. It's like we used to have a ping pong table, and I don't have my ping pong time anymore, and it's nice to have something to just sort of break it up a bit. Emma, so do you think this is a sort of watershed moment then for thinking about well-being at work?
I think it is. I mean, I think it was Alex that said earlier on that, many companies, many firms have been supporting wellbeing really well and have had lots of initiatives anyway. But I think I definitely think wellbeing is going to be much more of a strategic priority for firms. So I think it's going to definitely have business leaders now that are driving the importance of wellbeing, rather than traditionally. I think it's very much been people and HR teams that have been driving the need for better, more supportive wellbeing. I mean, for us, certainly, I think what we definitely had different wellbeing initiatives across the business locally. There were some areas that were providing yoga, Certainly at the beginning of the pandemic, there were quizzes, and I think we'll all remember some of those quizzes that we were all dialing on via Zoom. But certainly for us, we developed a much more formal wellbeing program, and I think that's because we increased, across the business, that importance of wellbeing and connecting people all together. Little things like, we ran a group challenge, just simply using Strava, but we made it inclusive. People could run, cycle or walk, all to achieve this same group challenge. And I think it just, because we took a step back, asked people what they wanted and what we thought people needed to better help well-being. And it made us have to think a bit more creatively about how we could achieve that. So I think people definitely will more formally be structuring their plans around well-being and having more dedicated well-being programs, definitely, as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just looking at myself, we've got a number of initiatives. We have a mindfulness session at the start of every week, and it's lovely. There's no sort of compulsion to do anything if it's not what you want, but it's there for you if you need it, which I think is great, and lots of companies are doing that, which is obviously good news. So we're going to move on now to sort of managing uncertainty as a next topic. Uncertainty has been everywhere for at least a year now. I'm sure many of you listening will remember that those first few weeks of just sort of wondering where your firm or business or practice is at and where to go from there. Alex, how do you manage that as a senior leader? Like, what do you do when the uncertainty is so high and obviously there's quite a lot of tension in the organisation?
Sure. So we started very quickly pivoting our communication channels and frequency. So the first thing that we did as Advanced was to consider we need to tell people what's going on, what we're looking at. So taking people on the journey from the very beginning and having them or trusting them to follow the data points. So we're sharing the metrics, we're sharing what does that mean to us, we're talking about what's going on in our industry and what's going on in the wider world. So we started actually with weekly calls on video, our CEO, myself as Chief People Officer, talking about what's happening, what we're feeling, also what we're looking at. So what are the internal business metrics that we're following and what does that mean to us? And that received the greatest amount of feedback for us to say, wow, we're sharing so much more than we ever did before. And so when we got to a point where we had to start making some difficult decisions, because we have had some furlough situation in the organisation, we have had things like we held bonus payments back whilst we just anticipated what was going on in the market, ultimately to pay them, which was wonderful for us. But we needed to develop our confidence to do that. And so we wanted to share the journey and the thinking and trust our people with data points that we just haven't shared before. And that for us enabled us to every single step when we were making decisions in the last 12 months, allowed us to have that full explained context. And the feedback, as I say, that we've received in terms of engagement from our workforce has been incredible. So for me, open, trusting, credible, fact-based communication, frequent, has been the biggest thing that we could do. Of course, sharing our own vulnerability, just to the points that we've just been talking about, actually, that demonstrates other senior leaders being very open and very sharing and trusting that our people will follow and understand as we make business decisions. So that, for me, is probably the thing I would recommend to anybody, considering difficult decisions and considering that, uncertainty within their workforce. Sharing openness, even when it's open to say we don't know something, that's okay. People appreciate, and certainly in my experience, have really appreciated the openness and the honesty of that. So clarity of the business metrics and sharing for me, has just really grown engagement and trust in our business. So that probably for me is the key thing to address and support people through such times of uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. Isabel, if we come to you, you know, obviously as a finance director, that can be, you know, a lot of the uncertainty, particularly at the start of the pandemic, was around a company's finances. So how did you manage it? Was it a similar sort of thing that you had to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's so great to hear you talking there about, you know, sharing business metrics and building trust and engagement. And I do think that's so important. You know, I mean, obviously in finance, it's a balance of what is appropriate to share and what's not, you know, both in the sort of internal domain, but also knowing that that will often become public. But I think absolutely those principles of trust and transparency are completely the right ones to go with. So I love to hear that other organisations are doing that. I'd actually like to just focus on uncertainty from the well-being perspective, if I may, which is that in my view, you know, this situation is bringing to the fore that which has always been true, which is that there is very little in life that is within our control. And I think as human beings, we like, especially us, you know, A-type finance people, you know, accountants particularly, you know, we like to believe that we're in control of things, but we're really, really not. I'm also a mindfulness teacher, and so I spend a lot of time, you know, focusing on that present moment awareness, you know, the present moment being the only thing that is really within your control. And I think if we look back to March, when, I mean, for us at the Financial Times, we didn't quite close our offices, but we largely sent people home on the 12th of March. And I remember at the time, you know, thinking, oh, this will be a month and that's going to be really difficult. And as people left the office, you know, a few people joked and said, oh, happy Easter and happy Halloween and happy Christmas. And it just felt completely unknowable that we would spend all this time away. So if you think back for yourselves, you know, that uncertainty that all of us have been through, if you think back to nearly a year ago, how did you feel on the precipice of that unknown? And look where you've come to. You have, you know, one way or another, the challenges that you've been through, you are here on this webinar today. You have come through all of that adversity and all of that uncertainty, and you're still functioning here today. And I think what that shows us is that as part of the human condition, we are actually very good at surviving. And I think it teaches us an important lesson, which is that there is so little in life that we can control except our response to situations. And I think that's a really valuable learning. So if people can take that forward and try to, you know, build that into their lives going forward, I do think it really helps. It's a hard way to learn that lesson, but it's been apparent to me from right back in March that that's really what we're being taught here.
Yes, I remember the most sort of pessimistic was, this will be over in 12 weeks, and that feels a long time ago.
Right.
So Emma, do you think the rules for communications with employees are changing? You know, is it like that they have a right almost to be more informed than before?
It's a really interesting question. I think, you know, communication has always been important, but I think because we find ourselves in a different environment, we've certainly had to more consciously think about communication. And because of the uncertainty and the, I suppose, pressure people feel under in the different circumstances they're in, communication is the one thing that can actually reassure people and help their, you know, mental health, for example. So, you know, I think, I'm not quite sure the rules have changed as such, but I think we definitely are more conscious and we have to think differently. You know, we're finding ourselves having to use digital communications a lot more than we did before. And I think because of that, we want them to be engaging, and that means we have to be a little bit more creative about how we put out those communications. I think the other thing is we can't just rely now at the moment, certainly, on popping into an office and having a chat with somebody or saying, oh, do you know what, I'll try and catch that person over lunch. And so now we have to plan the time to speak to somebody because it's not quite so easy to get hold of somebody in the same way. And so we find ourselves operating in a different environment when we're communicating with one another. I think people want to be informed, but I think they always did, and I think this has maybe just accelerated the need to communicate with people more. So I think, we certainly, are finding that we are communicating differently. We're picking up the phone more often to check in with somebody and see how they are, but we're also trying to think a bit more creatively about how we get the communication out to people, not just relying on email, for example, and, there's now access to Teams so that you can obviously share and collaborate. There's obviously digital mediums, and I think people are using video a lot more now to get a message across because it's a lot more heartfelt and it can come from the person and not just from written text. So I think it's changed. And so perhaps maybe therefore the rules have changed as a result.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we're going to move on to the sort of negative topic of the webinar, of dealing with redundancy, and I guess, linking to that uncertainty. If we're looking ahead to the future, furlough will eventually come to an end, and there is a sense, at least, that redundancies will be inevitable as part of that. For some companies, we shall see, I guess. But how do you, Alex, if we go to you, how do you successfully manage those tough conversations and those tough situations? Not saying that you're going to have to do that, but how do you deal with it if it does ever come up?
Sure. Well, it probably starts with a lot of the discussion we just had around the previous topic. So for me, building business context, sharing, over communication, sharing the journey helps to then bring, if you're ultimately in that position and having to manage redundancies, people have an understanding and appreciation, and it's less of a shock. So the shock factor can be a big thing within organisations. So I think we all have a greater responsibility to reduce shock when these things happen. And people, this is a psychological journey for people when it impacts them directly. And I see our responsibility as employers to help manage that psychological journey from, regardless of the build-up of comms. It's still a shock, of course, but you can limit that. And then it's about the supportive practices that you can wrap around helping people to move forward and start to think about what does the future look like. And the quicker you can take someone on that journey to considering the future is the best thing that I think employers can do for people who are impacted in this way. Outplacement support is something that many companies will seek to go and find. We've built our own outplacement support internally for Advance when these things, because these things come up in all business, in all times, not just through the pandemic. And we've done things like helping people where perhaps they've not been in the workplace, in the kind of candidate pool for maybe 10, 15, 20 years. They don't know how to write their CV. They don't know how to really make sure that they're selling themselves on LinkedIn. So doing basic things like helping them consider, how do I now consider having an interview? How do I get my LinkedIn profile to be the very best it can be? I think that's something with which we can all as employers really help support people with, whether that's, say, going externally for such help or building your own using HR teams and other people within the business who have that skill set. So the communication, the context, the reducing the shock, the supportive principles about helping someone move forward in that psychological journey, I think are the critical things to, redundancy is never going to be a positive thing, but you can reduce the negative impact on people quite dramatically by supporting them through each step, of those aspects. And they're probably the major touch points that I would recommend. And I'm sure, Isabel and Emma will have other ideas and other experiences that they've had to probably throw into this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Emma, what's your take on that?
Do you know what? Very, very similar to Alex. I think, I think one of the things that probably I would add is your values, your organisational values, and they can be really tested when you are in these difficult circumstances, and whether you still do live by those same values that sort of underpin your culture. But I absolutely agree with Alex that I think explaining to people what's happening, so being really honest about what's happening in the business so that they can develop their understanding of why you're in that situation, enables people to manage their emotions better in these situations. Demonstrating that you've considered alternatives, with redundancy, it's really important, that we can demonstrate we have considered different alternatives and sought their views on that. And I think explaining the change curve, that is something that is probably quite helpful to actually show people the different emotions they're going to feel as they go through these discussions, and reassure them that that's actually very normal and expected. And I think probably the only other thing I would add, because I completely agree with Alex, with outplacement support to help people get the skills and the tools that they need to look to the future. But I think it's also, I think as well as that, it is other resources that we've spoken about, such as the employee assistance programs, if you've got them, using the CABA's resources as well, because I think there's a lot of resources there that can support people when they are in these situations. And explaining that if you are in a redundancy situation, it is the job role. It's not that person personally. It doesn't always help entirely, but I think as long as we're demonstrating how important that person is, but actually explaining it's the job role that's made redundant, is just another way of explaining the situation that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. So we didn't want to end on a negative note. We'd like to end on a positive note. So we're going to talk about managing progression now. And, on the flip side of that, there will be lots of employees who are waiting for that progression, which might have naturally stalled somewhat. They might be experiencing a pay freeze, for example, and hoping that suddenly, as the economy opens back up again, that so too will their budget get a bit bigger. Isabel, if we go to you, what can senior leaders do for those sort of people looking for progression?
Yeah, this is a topic that's really relevant at the moment. I think, as you say, people have to some extent accepted the fact that they're not likely to get their promotions and pay rises that they might have otherwise expected. But, as you say, things have moved on to some extent, and therefore for a lot of people, they are thinking, right, it's time to make up that lost ground. And that is a real challenge for leaders. I would go back to what Emma and Alex have said previously, which is, that need to be open and transparent, as much as you can be. I think there's always a danger as managers of kind of fobbing people off or, giving platitudes or reassurances that we can't actually stand behind. So I think openness, transparency is really important. I think empathy, showing understanding of why people might feel a certain way. And then I think, thinking about non-linear progression is really important in this situation because, yes, the economy is opening back up to some extent, but we're still in a huge period of uncertainty. So I think lots of businesses are cautious about saying, okay, let's increase our fixed cost base, exponentially by giving big pay rises, and let's go forth and, backdate all those promotions or whatever. So I think we do need to think about those non-linear progressions, as I say. So things like secondments, training, mentoring, finding ways to stretch and challenge people that aren't necessarily the next promotion or the next pay rise right now. And I know that, that in itself possibly sounds like a platitude. So it has to be done, with serious plans to back it up. I always think that people's progression should be in their own hands, so come up with, where do you think you're lacking a skill, or is there an area of the business that you're interested in? Who could you talk to? How could you upskill yourself? How can you show curiosity and get involved in different conversations? But I do think, it's really important, as I've said, to make people feel heard. So acknowledging that this is tough. It's tough for us as well. So yeah, I think bringing empathy to the situation is always really, really important. But finding a different way to look at progression whilst we're still in this very unusual time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really interesting. Alex, what's your take?
Yeah, so I'm really passionate about this area. At Advance, we have a very strong push and philosophy around internal mobility. So we found, even through obviously what has been really difficult months for everybody, including us, but we've maintained internal mobility. So in normal years, it's 65% of vacancies which come through are filled internally. Those are still opportunities to develop career steps. And so I'm a constant voice to our managers: be creative. Let's ensure that we're driving people's careers forward, because we can. We don't want to stagnate. And so by creating, sometimes to help people have the confidence to take those things which is probably still there, getting them to do things like secondments, shadowing projects, certainly at this moment, and I would say especially in the finance sector, tech projects and around security and compliance are really integral projects that broaden skills, that give people confidence to perhaps take a step and a career step that they might not have considered previously. For me, my big sales pitch to everybody in our organisation is, through our data points that we've looked at, you have got a 6 times greater opportunity to build your compensation and reward by taking internal mobility steps than you have by sitting it out and waiting for some sort of annual review to happen. And of course, in the last 12 months, a lot of companies have not even had any budget to consider for something like an annual review. So I still feel that even through difficult times, you can generate career progression through internal mobility steps and create really interesting projects and opportunities. The other thing I would say, which I think a lot of companies still struggle with using, and I can understand why, but I would say maintain the struggle and the path, is using the apprenticeship levy. So we've used the apprenticeship levy to pay for MBAs. Now that, I think, is the most incredible use of the apprenticeship levy, to effectively something which you're paying out anyway to utilise towards a key talent in your organisation, developing those wonderful qualifications and confidence and skills. And there's a retention aspect. It shows that we want to actually build those skills in these people because we believe in their futures with our organisation. So I would definitely say things like the apprenticeship levy for me are really untapped opportunities, which are definitely hard to get going, but when you've got them going, wow, they're powerful. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to continue to move people's careers forward, ready for budgets becoming perhaps available in the future. But equally, I think you can drive some of that budget opportunity through some of that internal mobility movement, because I would say that's something with which is a key philosophy and driver within Advance around how we progress our own talent through our business.
Yeah, that's fascinating, particularly about the apprenticeship levy, because it's a use it or lose it sort of policy. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there are so many apprenticeships available, but I've kind of touched on the MBA one because I think certainly for a lot of senior people who, might be considering, what else do I add into my kind of CV and how do I develop my skills? Sometimes people haven't had that opportunity because of cost. It's a huge cost normally to have an MBA, but actually using a levy, free. So why not use it? And I've got a number of people within my own team going through MBAs at the moment, because why wouldn't I? And you just need their passion and their engagement, because they're the ones doing the hard work at the end of the day. So it's a really easy investment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both for those great answers. So just going to move now to the audience questions section of the webinar. So I'm glad to say we have had loads of questions come in. So firstly, let's have a look. I think the first one I'd like to ask is for Isabel. It just says, can you explain some of the work that you do with CABA and the work CABA does more generally as well?
Yes, brilliant. Thank you so much. CABA is a fantastic organisation. I really wish when I was a ACA student that I'd known about their work. They provide support for chartered accountants and their close family. So one thing I'd highlight is, we talked about the unfortunate negative impact of redundancy or, finding yourself without work or with a sudden change in career path that you weren't expecting. So CABA provide career coaching. They provide a whole host of different professional development courses. They can help people with planning, retirement. For some people, that might be coming earlier than they were expecting due to a job loss. There's a careers microsite that has all sorts of insights and resources to support you through all stages of your career. So there's loads of different topics on there, including some of the things we've talked about, like, for managers, not just for yourself if you're facing a career challenge, but resources for managers there. There's lots and lots of different tools there. So that's the kind of professional career side of things. The other thing that they do is emotional support, which I think is fantastic. So I work for CABA as a trainer and as a coach as well. So they will provide up to 5 sessions of one-to-one careers coaching with a coach such as myself, or, there's a whole host of really experienced, brilliant coaches that work with CABA. They have a 24-hour helpline as well, so you never need to feel like you're alone. There is always someone that you can talk to 24 hours a day, and they can put you in touch with counsellors, therapists, all sorts of different things there. And then lastly, I could go on and on. It's brilliant. They have a fantastic website. It's cabacaba.org.uk. You can just Google it. But also, I just want to point out that they do things like financial assistance, legal advice, debt advice. So there is an absolute host of support out there for you. And if you are an ACA or the dependent or partner of an ACA, this is free for you. And I can't quite get over myself how they provide this fantastic support for free. So I would really urge you to go and check out what they do. It is absolutely fantastic, and I'm really proud to work in partnership with them.
Oh, great. Thank you. So we've had another question here. I think I'll go to Emma for this one. So Emma, the question is, do you see an openness or a resistance in leaders to upskill themselves and their leadership teams with well-being skills as part of their own personal development to support a more well-being-based culture, if that makes sense?
I definitely see an openness. I think it's probably mixed, and you'll get people at different stages, in their sort of journey of wanting to upskill themselves. But certainly, what I've observed is an openness to want to do it. Like as I said, we started off with 1 or 2 of our businesses, running things like yoga, mindfulness sessions. And now we're seeing many more of those local managing partners wanting to do that, and actually now seeking out for us to do it nationally. So we're engaging with people because managers and managing partners are wanting to offer out that wellbeing support. We've seen, a managing partner in our business who has actually gone out internally across the business as part of our Stress Awareness Week to share his experiences with mental health, and that was so that he could share how he has managed it and hopefully help others. So we've definitely seen, an openness for people to want to develop their skills and share their experiences and vulnerability, which we certainly hadn't before. So I think definitely there's an openness rather than a resilience. And I think that's because people have found themselves in those situations more than they maybe had before themselves, and they can relate, that they can be more empathetic than they maybe were previously.
Absolutely. So as a sort of ending to the session, I'd like to ask each of you the same question, but just give you 30 seconds to answer it if you can. So that is, what is the key point you would like the audience to take away from today? So Alex, shall I start with you?
Oh goodness, what a big question. I'll start. My headline is, for me, tech is the enabler. Tech has been the enabler, and it continues to be the enabler to creating and enabling us to have this flexibility. What that does, though, is it allows us to continue to kind of join the dots with what does that mean? What are the positive consequences that can flow from that? And for me, that leads to greater flexibility, greater opportunity for us to consider different talent in our organisations, which can ultimately also lead to greater diversity. And I join the dots even to the point of saying greater gender pay gap reduction. So all of these things can absolutely link their way through. And I think it's been fantastic for us to be able to step back and see that kind of change in action and the dot joining that you can kind of see all that comes from flexibility, which is enabled from tech. So you start with a headline and you can get to actually some really fundamental change within our workplaces and within society. And that to me has been the most exciting opportunity, because we have to find opportunity through these times. But that to me has been the exciting opportunity.
Great, thank you. And Emma?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we're clearly experiencing a very changing working environment as we move forward because of what we've experienced this last year. And so I think for me, my biggest takeaway, I think, is that leadership is going to be more important than ever. How to manage our teams and support their well-being. And I think, if I were to try and sum up what those key areas would be, I think it's crucial that we stay connected with our team members and that we don't lose the connections we've built, because we maybe do get back to some of that more office environment in the future as part of that hybrid. I think communicating clearly, we've experienced how important that is, and that there's much more innovative and creative ways we can do it. Flexibility, as Isabel said, and I think also having carefully considered plans so that we can manage expectations, whether that's carefully considered plans around the business and the impact on individuals, but equally, as we've done, developing things like a wellbeing program, so you can really carefully think about the different areas you want to support and how you're going to do that. I think if you start with a plan, it at least gives you that sort of grounding to sort of move forward.
Great. And lastly, Isabel, what do you want the audience to take away from today?
Okay, so you've all come to this webinar because I'm assuming you're interested in some level of kind of well-being and how we can look after ourselves and our people and how we can sort of do better in that space. So what I would really like everyone to take away is that it's our responsibility, for those of us that are leaders, but also for anyone that works in employment with other people, it's our responsibility to elevate the conversation around well-being. We've talked a bit today about, bringing your authentic self to work. I would urge everybody to speak up about yourself, your own struggles, how you're getting on, but ask people how they really are too. Leaders particularly have a responsibility to role model behavior. So, allowing those chinks of vulnerability that we talked about earlier is so important. Continuing to keep wellness and, mental well-being on the agenda. So exactly as we've said, not just having the odd yoga class or mindfulness class, out there, but actually continuing the culture and I've said it before, but elevating the conversation around well-being would be my really key thing, because I think that's something that all of us can take away and do something about in the next half an hour, whether it's just reaching out to someone and saying, this is how I'm feeling today, how about you? Small things like that is really actionable. So that would be my key thing. I urge you all to go away and do something like that.
Brilliant. Thank you. What a nice note to finish on. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. So thank you to Isabel, Emma and Alex for your time and your excellent insights. And thank you to our audience for listening and watching. If you're from an accountancy firm or just want to find out more about how Cabba can support you and your team, head over to cabba.org.uk. And if you're an HR professional, as ever, head over to hrdconnect.com. Or if you want to hear the latest accountancy news, go to accountancyage.com. But for now, that's all from us. So until next time, it's goodbye.